Hello everyone, I am back at the Hawthorne collection at UBC in the Woodward Library. I've been doing some more reading and some more taking in of this wonderful collection. This is still, as I said before, just a partial bit of the collection, and I've also discovered that there are even more archives and collections dedicated to a particular author, namely Roderick Haig-Brown. And so I'm looking forward to exploring all of that and continuing this amazing opportunity to come to work and read about fly fishing. In the last video, I tried to clarify that my interest in ethics and fishing, well, with ethics, I'm interested in sort of the sense of the good life and human flourishing and how one should live. And with respect to fishing, I'm interested really in recreational fishing and not principally in commercial fishing. There's another word that's basically a synonym for recreation or recreational fishing, and that's sport or sport fishing. Sometimes people talk about fishing as a sport, as a sense of like baseball. But there's a sense of sport that actually baseball and fishing share, but only in one sense. Whenever baseball or any other sport becomes a professional sport, it's almost a contradiction in terms, at least on a particular understanding of the word sport. Sport can mean to do something for pleasure or for fun. And one way people sometimes define what means pleasure and fun as opposed to other things is whether or not you're doing it for its own sake or you're doing it for some kind of reward, an external reward. And rewards could be remuneration, economic or otherwise. And I think there's a general struggle with sport achieving a certain high level and at some level almost outwitting itself into something that would be less of a sport and more of a profession. I suppose that's the life trajectory of the fishing guide or people in the fishing industry in some ways. However, I really am not really interested in the commercial or professional side, the non-sporting side of fishing. And that does maybe give an impression that maybe I think, for instance, that the good life or human flourishing are going to be most concentrated within the recreational and the sport fishing side of things. That's not true. I actually think that fishing and hunting, hunting is basically doing a certain thing on land, and fishing is basically doing the same thing basically on water. Fishing and hunting are very ancient activities. They have, I think, deep moral purpose. It's hard to think about how one should live if you're hungry. And so, harvesting food for oneself and especially for others, sharing that food in community, there's a deeply moral project there. There's nothing amoral, there's nothing ethically uninteresting about, a common table and the common meal and the activities that bring that food to that table. I don't want to minimize it or make it seem as if I see these as, irrelevant or at some level shallow. Frankly, there's room, and maybe there will be room for a future project where I look at that side of things. And I even have to confess that my own relationship to fishing personally is probably much more out of that tradition. I grew up hunting and fishing. I was taught how to hunt and fish. I was taught how to shoot and how to cast by my dad and my grandparents and my uncles. And for me, that activity, while it is a sport, and I think it was a sport, it also feels like something not entirely, that I can't entirely consign to leisure. It feels like something cultural, something like as a part of who I am and a part of generations of people before me. So that's really serious, and that's super ethical. However, it's precisely because sports fishing and recreational fishing, I believe, actually presents some real obstacles and some real problems, such as, for instance, catch and release fishing in some sense breaks the link between hunting and fishing, because in hunting you have a terminal situation when you pull the trigger, whereas with fishing in catch and release you have the catch and then you release it back in ideal circumstances unharmed and with very low impact. And that makes it very different, and at some level I think almost more ethically questionable than the other form. And so I want to stay on the questionable side. In part, I think as a philosopher and as an ethicist, I find the situations where you seem to be in the most trouble to be the most interesting ones to think about. And of course, I am primarily at this point engaging in catch and release fishing, using the methods of fly fishing, within that a subset of swung flies or grease line flies, traditional single and double hand fishing in the Pacific Northwest. So no surprise, this project is pretty much restricted to that form of recreational or sport fishing, namely fly fishing, primarily for steelhead in the Pacific Northwest, and that's going to be the direction I go in. I hope it's not too arbitrary in one sense, but on the other hand, I also hope it's sufficiently focused and sufficiently contained so that whatever comes of it is not overgeneralized or inappropriately extended in other directions. But there are some serious challenges to it, and there are some really important admissions, I think, to begin with. One, sports fishing through fly fishing, the swung fly, grease line fly for steelhead, is a very kind of modern thing. It's not ancient. It's, give or take 100 or so years old. It comes from somewhere. In this case, a lot of these methods come from Europe. Spey is a common word. That is a river in Scotland. The Welsh cast is obviously referring to Wales. We have some evidence of fly fishing. I think it goes as far back as Macedonia, quite a long time ago, and then a medieval manuscript. And so there is something about the kind of fishing I'm talking about that is going to be fairly recent and isn't going to probably have a whole lot of relevance to the much grander, much more ancient, and in some sense maybe more deeply human activity that would resemble fishing for sustenance or fishing for survival or fishing for food, essentially. Having said that, I know I have an uphill climb, and I still believe at this point that my argument will be that there is something, though, uniquely ethical, uniquely moral about this, however problematic, approach to fishing, and that there's a road there that leads somewhere that is in some sense unattainable by the other roads. And it's not to say that those roads don't lead to their own moral mountaintops and whatnot, but I think there's something unique going on here. I haven't been there myself, but I have, I think, read about it, and I maybe even have run into it here or there, and maybe I'll get some examples of that down the road. Okay. The point of clarification I want to make then is that now finally I can say what this project is. I want to think about the ethics in the sense of things related to the good life, to human flourishing, to how I should live, the ethics of fly fishing for steelhead with the methods of the swung and grease line fly, which of course were adaptations of forms of fishing for Atlantic salmon and so on and so forth. I know it's messy getting in there, but those of you who do this also, I think, understand and recognize it as being unique and being something very different from streamer fishing or Euro nymphing or pike fishing or those kinds of things. Which isn't to say that it's not fun to catch smallmouth bass on streamers or on topwater stuff, but that's not going to be the domain. Finally, as I enter more deeply into this project, and especially as I read from this archive, however modestly I've done up to now, the more impressed I am by the existing moral philosophy that is in these pages. Maybe not by people who are self-professed philosophers or moral philosophers or professional ethicists. And don't get me started on being a professional philosopher. It's kind of like being a professional baseball player. It's a bit of a contradiction, if you ask me. But one particular author stands out and I think towers over the archive, which is Haig-Brown. He actually uses the word philosophy and is sometimes described as a philosopher. He talks about ethics explicitly and aesthetics and many other things. I've recently today been reading from a collection of excerpts collected by his eldest daughter. The title is To Know a River, and the final section of that is specifically focused on ethical questions and philosophical questions. And I think that one thing I'm going to add to this project is just sharing some of my readings and sharing some of the things I'm learning from the works of others and from the books of others. There is a broad and vast literary tradition in fly fishing specifically. I think Haig-Brown argues that it is the most literary tradition to all the forms of fishing and a kind of rod and gun sports available. And I don't know if he's right, but I'm inclined to believe he is. So in addition to my project on the ethics of fly fishing for steelhead in the Pacific Northwest using single and double-handed rods with the swung and grease line fly, I also want to take some time to share some of the treasures of this archive and some of the insights, especially as they relate to that other project. And so that's where we are now, and I really just thank you for your time and your attention. And for those of you who are fishing, I hope to see you on the water someday.